podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.
Hello everyone, I'm Chris Rigg. Welcome to Haway The Podcast from ROUNDUP Report, and welcome to yet another summer news roundup. And as we'll get into things, we'll realise that silly season is well underway. We've had reports, and Gav jumped on with Andrew and talked about potential director of football joining the club, and we've got lots of transfer news come up. And luckily, we have a man who knows his stuff, because from a Sunderland perspective, he updates our transfer gossip piece on the website on a weekly basis. We're very pleased to have our very own Jim White with us. All right, Bomber?
Hello, Chris. That was my really pathetic Scottish accent there.
Well, I'd like to say you sat there in your yellow tie, looking all smart, but actually you're in a vest because we're all roasting.
Yeah, it's absolutely boiling. I mean, I can take the vest off and just put a yellow tie on if
No. Yes. No. That's
yeah.
absolutely.
I also really enjoy the fact that you've introduced me as transfer expert, when actually the only thing I'm expert in is gathering all the news and putting it into one place. So if that makes me an expert, hey, I'll happily take the title, mate.
That's all gossip is. I mean, that's the only reason we've got the internet, really, isn't it? For gossip and maybe one or two other things. But yeah, and actually don't take your top off, because I remember when we had to abandon a pod because your microphone got stuck in your chest hair.
Yeah, we won't talk any more about that.
Okay, right, we'll leave that. Just keep your vest on, though, mate. Because we do have someone else with us, and hopefully he has all the gossip from round the doors on his pod tours. We also have Jonny Hawley with us. Hello, Jonny.
Morning. It's lovely to be here with you two fine gents on this absolutely sweltering day to talk about Sunderland yet again.
It is, yes, and potentially huge news, because look, nothing's been. We're kind of peek behind the curtain. We are recording before anything has been confirmed, but from the news at the time that we are talking, it seems like it's all but confirmed. So we're talking about the potential appointment of a sporting director or a football director, obviously because it hasn't been confirmed. It hasn't been confirmed in what role. But we'll go from some of the words from L'Equipe in France. It starts off by saying 15 years after Damien Comolli joined Liverpool, a second Frenchman will become sporting director of a Premier League club. Having just left AS Roma, which finished 5th in Serie A last season, Florent Gisolfi is expected to make a swift move to Sunderland, who have been promoted to the Premier League. Now, from all of the reports we've heard, it seems like Christian Speakman's still going to be in his role as potentially sporting director. Again, we don't know which way around it is, but one of them, and it seems it's Gisolfi, will take the director of football role. And we heard, I think it was the Fixtures Breakfast, Speakman was talking, and he mentioned about flying back from somewhere 2 a.m. and things like this. And it seems to me, Bomber, we'll start with you, and it seems to me that, Speakman, worked for Birmingham in the past and has taken us up from League One to the Championship. And he's kind of worked at that level. But I do think, and again, if somebody says, they're flying all over the shop, they're coming back at 2 a.m, they're trying to get deals done. And he's never on paper done deals of this size. And, it is, you can imagine that the further up the food chain you go, the more complex these deals become. Now, it makes sense that once we get to this level, that he gets some help in. Now, you've got someone here who's been at Roma, coveted by potentially Juventus, Fiorentina, Newcastle, big clubs. And it's so, and 40-year-old, which makes me absolutely sick. I hate when they make appointments that are younger than me. Managers and all that, they should be older than me, but it never works out like that anymore. But he's on the up. He seems like a talented fella, but it just makes sense, Bomber, that Christian Speakman gets a bit of help at this level.
Yeah, it absolutely does. And I don't think that's any discredit to Speakman, because, whenever he's needed to step up, he joined us obviously in League One, and, going around League One, trying to get deals done, going off to the likes of Cheltenham and Oxford and places like that, trying to get the best talent from League One, is a lot different to being in the Premier League and flying all over continental Europe to try and get those done. I guess the principles are the same. There's just a lot of more moving parts, a lot more people involved, and the numbers, the figures, are astronomical compared to League One fees and League One money. So that's not to say that he can't do it, but I think getting some support in, particularly somebody, I'll be honest, I've never heard of the guy beforehand, but just looking on paper, having worked as a sporting director at Nice, at Lens, currently at Roma, and there's some pretty big clubs also interested in taking him into their back room. You mentioned the likes of Juventus and Newcastle. So on paper, it does feel like a bit of a coup. If our previous track record of taking talent away from Roma is anything to go by, he's going to be absolutely fantastic and pivotal in, adopting a transfer model that is suitable for keeping us in the Premier League and beyond in years to come. The goal has very much changed from finishing top of the league in League One, finishing top of the league in the Championship. That was obviously our goals. It's very different this season. So Speakman's already said that the model is going to need to be tweaked in some way. And I think ultimately what it shows is that our model is going to be almost a continuation of raiding the best young talent in France and Italy. And if our current track record is anything to go by, and with the addition of someone who is as highly regarded as Ghisolfi, I'm all for it. Looking forward to seeing what he can bring if and when it does actually happen.
Yep, and if anyone had 6 minutes on their sweepstake for how long it was taking us to say the model, then it was 6 minutes. And then Bomber went and rattled it off in 3 times in the space of 30 seconds. But it does seem to be the buzzword that you always come up with when it comes to Sunderland, Johnny. But it seems like this was the plan. And again, it's someone who I think Gav went through it on his on his quick pod that he stuck out when the news broke. That there's links all over the shop, and I go back to the days of Defante. Unfortunately,
why?
Yeah, exactly. But the thing is that's what you think. If you just pull in someone who has a reputation, but this seems to be someone they know and they trust and they've worked with before. So it doesn't seem like we've plucked him just because somebody's tipped us off and said, oh, he's decent at what he does. It seems like people in the club, have went to someone they know and trust, and he's left a huge club and come to us.
Yeah, and I think as well, a couple of the pieces that I saw talking about the news break, and they seem to suggest that we've been in talks with them for a good few weeks at this point. You'd imagine that prior to the talks happening, they'd have been doing a bit of due diligence, they'd have been looking into him, his background and all that stuff. So I think, obviously from a fan's point of view, if this does go through, then it's kind of come out of nowhere and hit us all in the space of a couple of days. But obviously for the club, that's not the case. They'll have been looking at this over a timeline of months, not a timeline of days. So I think that speaks to everything in terms of how the club see this fitting into their long-term plans, and always have done. I think, like you say, Chris, it's pretty obvious they're not going to just kind of turn around and heard someone say, oh, Ghisolfi's decent, and gone, right, lads, let's go in and try and pry him away from Roma in Serie A. They're going to have presumably as well, they might have had like a short list they were working from, so he wouldn't have been the only option. If you decide that you need a director of football or whatever role he ends up having, you don't just go, oh, well, we need this role, but we only want him. They're going to have had backups and stuff. So I'm sure that there's a clear plan internally for where he fits into the hierarchy. And, I'm sure a lot of fans may be a bit concerned, thinking, oh, is he stepping on Speakman's toes? Is this a sign of some sort of bad feeling behind the scenes? But I think from my point of view, I don't really worry about any of that. My only concerns are, is the guy as good as his reputation suggests? Because if he is, then absolutely happy days. I think, and again, as Bomber said, the more help you can have when you're stepping up to this level and having to deal with the size of clubs and the level of players that we now are, I think the more help you can get, the better, because it's uncharted territories for basically everyone at the club now. So, the more help, the better for me.
And just looking at it as well, Bomber, that, potentially he was, you look back and Lafayette joined us in January, and, you've got to think he was a signing he brought in. And again, with the links there, that he knows Regis Labrie. And you wonder if he did pick up the phone and go, and obviously Lafayette played for him. And you wonder if he picked up the phone and went, actually, he's not getting on too well at Roma. Do you fancy taking him? And almost kind of facilitated that deal already with Sunderland. But you do wonder as well if, he's already been involved in that negotiation with Sunderland, but being on this side, and Tom White actually touched on it. From his sources, he fully expects Sunderland to go out and break their transfer record again. So, it makes sense again that actually this is going to be the next level of transfer, isn't it?
Yeah, it certainly suggests that. I mean, I say if he's currently at Rome, firstly, there's clearly already a relationship there, like you said. He would have been pivotal in that Enzo Lafay deal, so he would have dealt with Regis Labrie, would have dealt with Christian Speakman before, and he'd know the possibilities of getting a deal done with Sunderland to get Enzo Lafay to the Stadium of Light. And maybe that was the start of some sort of relationship, which has led him to be part of become part of our backroom team. But yeah, as I mentioned before, just the levels of transfer. Speakman, for all his positive traits and the good work that he's done. We're not talking 6-7 million pound players anymore. We're talking 20, 30, possibly 40 million pound players, incoming and outgoing. Remember, to think about the Joe fee and the fees being banded around for Chris Rigg. Where at Roma he will have dealt with transfers of that like in terms of the fees and the monies that's involved in it, and the structure as well. Because the more money you shell out for a player, the more convoluted the structure of that payment and who gets what and when occurs. So I think it's all on paper because I don't know him or anything that he's done, but it's very positive. And you've alluded to what Tom White said to us, and it's very as a fan. Forget about us talking about the news and relaying it back on in a podcast. Just for me personally, as a fan, it is very, very exciting at the notion that we might break our transfer record another once, possibly twice in this window, and we're bringing in somebody who is at, let's be honest, an elite top 5 league club, to help us do that. And he's going to know certainly Serie A, like the back of his hand. He's going to know who the rough diamonds are and the Enzo Lafays of the rest of Serie A. He's probably going to know a lot more than us about the rest of continental Europe as well. And he'll have the ties in continental Europe. So Christian Speakman might not necessarily need to fly here, there, and everywhere at 2:00 in the morning because he's already there. He can just pick up the phone to somebody and speak to them rather than have to fly over and meet them. And he's probably in continental Europe now, so he could be having those discussions, on a daily basis, face to face, before coming over. I don't know whether he would plan to live in the northeast or even live in England or just do his job remotely and do all the good stuff in France and Spain and Italy on our behalf. But yeah, I keep caveating this on paper, but on paper it's very, very exciting in prospect.
Yeah. I mean, and again, Jonny, just in terms of it's almost like the club scaling up, isn't it? Because look, you can imagine that over the last couple of years, Christian Speakman's been able to cover everything: transfers, the academy, coaching, right down to the grassroots and the young kids. But he's probably had to deal with everything, and to outgoing loans. I mean, because at that level, you can't really recruit all the people you need. But I suppose it's like any business, isn't it? This isn't kind of Ghisolfi coming in and, right, well, I'm replacing Speakman and Speakman's getting a demotion or anything like this. This is Ghisolfi coming in and taking that stuff off Speakman's plate so he's not kind of spread out across everything across the club. And Gasolfi maybe can concentrate on the transfer sides of things, and Speakman can overlook kind of from a high level point of view. So it just makes sense that as the club get bigger, that we bring in more people who can help with all of these roles. So nobody's kind of overwhelmed with these things.
Yeah, and I think it's a continuation of a trend that I think we've seen since the League One days, generally across the club. I just think it's taken a different form this time. So you think of the players that we were signing, even, under Speakman and Kirill at the end of the League One days. Yeah, they were a higher level than we'd maybe signed over the previous 4 seasons, but they were still, British players generally, or, we brought Sirkin in from Spurs, we brought Paddy Roberts in, we brought Jack Clark in. These are all players that you don't need to have a massive scouting operation to be able to identify. Then we step up to the Championship and we start bringing in players from the continent, players from Eastern Europe. There are more of these slightly more exotic sort of gambles. I think that's reflective of the club scaling up in a recruitment sense, looking at, casting a wider net sort of thing. And then we step up to the Premier League, and, as we've all kind of mentioned, the step up it's more of a chasm than a step these days, I think, between the Championship and the Premier League. So I just think it takes a different form now. It does become having to bring in new people and create new departments within the club, because that scaling up from League One to Championship, you times that by 10 or 20 or 30 in terms of how much of an extra step is needed at this level now. So yeah, I think I just think it'll catch people unawares, because it does feel very sudden to us. But I just emphasize that I think this is really, if you take a step back and look at it in the long term, this kind of has always been coming. Not specifically this guy coming in at this time, but this kind of thing was always going to have to happen, because, gone are the days when Roy Keane took us up in 2007 and then he would have had a massive say in all the transfers, and he would have been involved in sourcing players and, bringing Johnny Evans back and all that kind of stuff. The game's just moved on too much, and the top of English football is far too big of a beast to be tackled by sort of 2 or 3 guys sitting in a meeting room together and going, well, do you remember any good right backs from when you were playing at Man United? Like, that's not the world that we're operating in. So yeah, it was always going to have to happen. I think it's a positive thing, because it shows again that the club have got the head screwed on when it comes to recognising, yes, we've done great work to get where we are, but we're not where we want to be in the end yet. So we've got to keep going. And this is just, one part of that. So roll on the summer for me.
Yeah, we'll see what happens, because hopefully this is just the start this summer. But Bomber, we fully established just before we recorded that I'm way behind the times in the news in terms of all the transfer gossip that's going on. I think you even said I was sore last week. So can you give us the latest gossip, please, Jim?
Well, you were so last week because you were looking at last week's article, Chris. So, I mean, you don't go downfall there.
Have bags away, ladies. Come on.
Yeah, so I guess the biggest ones of this week, or certainly the most prominent ones, not necessarily big in terms of names necessarily, but from the research that I've done, that seems to be coming out of multiple sources. Firstly, Charlie Cresswell. So on the site on Tuesday, we were linked by a couple of outlets, but there's one French outlet as well, in particular, that were pushing Charlie Cresswell to us for a move to us. He's currently on international duty with the under-21s, and I think he scored as well. He scored in one of the group games. Yeah. But that seems to be kind of a little bit obsolete already, because from what I've seen this morning, Cesc Fabregas has stolen a march on us, and apparently he's due to sign for Como for about 14 million euros, possibly. Now, where Como have got 14 million euros from, I'm not entirely sure. But yeah, it sounds like that one may now be dead in the water. But I would argue that Charlie Cresswell, whilst he's a good, England international, isn't necessarily the type of player that we need to bring in. It's kind of smacks a little bit of a Dan Ballard regen. Not even a regen. Can't call him a regen, can you, when he's less than 25 years old? The other one is the Croatian international. Pronunciation is going to be all over the place here, but I'll give it a go. Aleksic.
That's why I left it to you, mate.
Yeah, cheers, mate. So he's currently at Lyon. At one point, he was subject or rumoured to be an eight-figure target for Liverpool. So talking around the 10, 11, 12 million pound mark, which Liverpool didn't take them up on. And Lyon ended up only paying £3 million for him last summer. I mean, he's 28 years old. He's another centre-back. He's got experience in England, albeit at Southampton. Again, one that's been reported in about 5 or 6 different places, but not one that, again, I don't think that we would be that excited about necessarily bringing in. I'm not sure on that one. There's a few others as well. There's a couple of loans that have come about. So another defender, this time left back for Chelsea, their 19-year-old academy player, Isha Samuel-Smith. That would be on a loan, apparently, because Enzo Maresca thinks very, very highly of him, and has plans for him to be a full first team starting left back, but needs senior football, and obviously can't really get it at Chelsea at 19 years old with the 75,000 players that they already have there. So there was a rumour that he might be coming to us on loan, and there was a couple north of the border as well. Again, not players that I've necessarily particularly heard of, so it's difficult to get too excited about them. But Lennon Miller, who's a Motherwell midfielder, just made his Scotland debut, his full international debut this month in some of the qualifiers. The Daily Record were reporting that we were interested in a £10 million move for him. He's another young prospect, very highly thought of, 18 years old, making his international debut for Scotland. He's Motherwell's youngest ever appearance maker. And the other one is for a bit more of a full-fledged international, USA international, Cameron Carter-Vickers. Celtic's, might have been Celtic's Player of the Year, I think. People might recognise the name. He's ex-Tottenham. He's played in the Champions League. He played in both legs of the Celtics games against Bayern Munich. Performed very well. Obviously, Celtic as a whole performed very well, albeit going out at that stage of the competition. No fee necessarily mentioned for that, but you can always rely on Transfer Market website for valuations. Currently valued at about 13 million. And he's 27 years old, so kind of slap bang in the peak with Champions League experience, SPL experience, SPL winners' medals. Wouldn't necessarily be adverse to him. And then there's a couple of others as well that I won't necessarily go into because they're very kind of tenuous, I guess. The clamour for Chris Rigg is snowballing. So according to my latest count, there's now 9 clubs that are interested in taking Chris Rigg away from us. And apparently that was triggered by somebody in the club or some source or something somewhere suggesting that we would consider £35 million for him, which has apparently pricked the ears of the likes of Everton, Brighton, Crystal Palace, Arsenal, RB Leipzig and Bayer Leverkusen. So those 7 have been added to the list, whereas last week it was just Manchester United and West Ham and Liverpool. It's a spin the wheel or roll the dice as to what club Chris Rigg might end up at. I mean, I think we all suggest that we would like him to stay with us. But £35 million is quite some sum of money if we do get offered that.
It's perfect. It's perfect for you to bring Rigg up with the 9 million clubs after him, because it's just about time for somebody to take over from Job in being a headline feature at this news roundup every week. We have to talk about Rigg every week now. It's Haway The Rigg cast. It's not.
We almost need like a little ticker that just says number of clubs Chris Rigg's signing for, and it's currently at 9. Next week it'll be 13. And then, August the 31st will come around and he'll still be at the club, hopefully. Yeah.
Or we always got to leave because the interested clubs start dropping off one by one.
Yeah.
As the bid gets too much. And then when it gets down to 1, that's it, he's off.
Yeah. Well, the only other one, Chris, to mention is a strange one, is Sam Greenwood, obviously ex-Sunderland Academy. Leicester apparently are interested in him. But apparently we're talking to Leeds about bringing him back to the club 7 years after he left us for Arsenal, which, no one could begrudge him that move at the time, such as the shit show we were. I'm not sure how I would feel about that one, but he was a decent player for Leeds last season. But they will say never go back, as Jermaine Defoe found out the hard way.
Yeah. I mean, we did say it was silly season, and it really is. But Jonny, I mean, listening to the latest news, I mean, Coletta Carr, Cresswell, you're talking Carter Vickers, Joe Gomez was linked, Taganga was linked from Millwall. I mean, it seems like the media are going big on, and I think there was a small link with Van Heck, wasn't there, from Brighton, I think, at one point. But I think the media are going big on the links with defenders. I mean, does it make sense to you, or is it just lazy?
I think it's a bit of both, really, because it does make sense. We do need defenders, and we certainly need centre-backs. I mean, obviously, we've lost Chris Mepham. I mean, as we sit right now, who knows if we might go back in for him, but it doesn't look massively likely, I would have said, with them, Bournemouth exercising that option to keep him for a further season. So, yeah, just numbers-wise, we're down. And then, obviously, that's without considering the fact that, that's an area of the pitch where you do need to try and have, real Premier League quality players. Because if you're not keeping clean sheets and if you're conceding sort of 2 and 3 goals a game, you're going to make a swift return to the Championship. So I think it certainly makes sense as a position for us to target. I just wonder whether some of the links are just a little bit too easy. Because Cameron Carter-Vickers, I would take him. I'd absolutely take him, certainly at the price that Bomber mentioned. But it's Scotland to the northeast, 27 years old, so just about young enough, and it just feels a little bit too much like look at player, find club nearby who need that position. Oh, look, they're interested in him. The Coletta Carr stuff's maybe a little bit more interesting because it's not a name or a club I would have immediately linked us with. I wouldn't be over the moon if we signed him, I wouldn't say, but those sort of links to me maybe carry a little bit more. Well, none of these carry that much weight, but those sort of links carry a bit more weight, I think, because I spoke about it on one of the other news pods I was on recently with Gav, and I was just saying, it's a lot of the links, particularly when it's, 3 and 4 clubs after the same player, according to the media, and it's like, well, are they like what? Are you in a WhatsApp group with all the different directors of football saying like, oh lads, by the way, what about this fella? And then you get 4 thumbs up. So you write your piece, right, Sunderland, Newcastle, Middlesbrough, Leeds, all interested in this lad. Like, it just, it's too, a lot of it's too convenient. So I think they're on the right track in terms of position and some of the profiles, because we are going to need a bit of experience. But, it's still only June. The chances of any of these players that we're hearing these stories about actually pulling on a Sunderland top with a Roker Report badge on the sleeve from DHgate come August the 16th, I think are pretty slim.
By the way, we need to talk about that. I completely forgot about that.
That's why I slipped it in.
Lads away on holiday sending pictures to us for that I've got the new Sunderland strip, or one of the designs of the new Sunderland strip that we stuck up on the site, and we stuck a Daft Roker Report logo on the sleeve, and lo and behold, they're in the kind of little marketplaces, all like in Turkey and wherever.
Yeah.
With the Roker Report logo on the badge. So now actually loads of people are snapping them up on holiday, and I think they're selling quite well now just because they've got the Roker Report logo on.
Publicity's bad publicity, Chris.
Yeah, they probably wouldn't have sold one otherwise.
We've got one on order so we can do a bit of quality control, but
I think everyone stuck an order in, didn't they? I think they've never had so much business. I don't think these fellas who knock these dodgy kits up. But yeah, Bomber, I mean, just on Johnny's point, because it's funny, because I mean, you probably see it obviously more than I do, doing it every week and sticking up the latest gossip. But it does seem like quite a lot of rumours, and Jonny kind of touched on it as well, the Leeds Sunderland thing. And it just seems because the newly promoted side, we're all linked with the same players.
Yeah, very, very, very much so. And it was last week, Jonny, me and you were on with Gav, and we were talking about clubs. I can't remember who it was, but there's one player in particular who was linked with Sunderland, Newcastle and Middlesbrough.
Yeah.
And we were like, wow, that's just kind of lazy journalism, isn't it? But yeah, it happens. It's not just to us. It happens every year, doesn't it? Like there's players. My feeling is there's agents of players who want to get out of their current clubs, and then all of a sudden they're linked with all three teams that have been promoted. It does seem to be us and Leeds rather than us, Leeds and Burnley. I've not actually heard that much in terms of Burnley, or certainly not our name mentioned with Burnley about being interested in certain players. But you had it every year. Last year came up and it was Southampton, Leicester and Ipswich are battling out for X player or Y player. So yeah, I think a lot of that is driven by player agents. You know, these players who aren't necessarily getting regular football at their top half of the Premier League or mid-table Premier League clubs, and are thinking, right, can I get them a move so that they stay a Premier League player and play every week? So the easiest thing to do is to make spurious contact with the three clubs that have just come up and hope that somebody goes, oh, they've got Premier League experience. You know, they've played for Brighton, who finished 8th or whatever it was that they finished. They'll do. How much do you want for them? And then all of a sudden, all three newly promoted clubs are rumoured to be interested. So yeah, it's a bit lazy, and it happens every year, doesn't it?
Yeah. I remember. Well, exactly. I remember going back to even the team talk days on teletext when they used to have daft headlines. When we were promoted under Peter Reid, we were linked with the headlines on there to get you to ring that bloody premium rate number was Ariel Ortega was one of them, and Roberto Baggio was another one on that. So
we should start the Jan Koller rumour again, just for old time's sake.
I was just about to mention Jan Koller.
And Robbie Keane for donkeys as well, every single year for years, and Peter Crouch. But anyway, modern day stuff. So let's go into outgoings, because the two big ones are Pierre Ekwah, who went to Saint Etienne, and they got relegated. And I think the presumption was, Johnny, that because they got relegated, he probably wouldn't end up there. He would need to find another club. But it does seem like they're trying to scrape the cash together, and it seems like roughly around 6 million. It says pounds was agreed rather than euros. I would have expected it to be 6 million euros. And that's really good money for him. You know, you consider that you would kind of almost shipped him out on loan, and the fact that they want to take him on, you imagine him being cracking at the lower level once they've been relegated. I mean, of course, West Ham will take a cut of that money with that deal, but on paper, it seems like a good deal.
It's interesting because there's a few moving parts now, isn't there? You've got, like you say, Chris, there was, I think the general presumption was that the move would be made permanent if they stayed up. And I think they only went down on the last day as well, didn't they? It was a close run thing. So, that would have left things up in the air a bit longer than usual. And from what I'd read, I think the original buy clause was 7 million euros, which may be where the £6 million figures come from, a conversion or whatever. But I'm not sure now whether the idea is, with them being relegated, for them to actually pay it all up front, or whether it's now going to need to be potentially some sort of negotiated installments or add-ons or, whatever it might be. So I don't know if it's going to necessarily be as straightforward as just, oh, we want Ekwah, here's the 6-7 million, you want to sell Ekwah, take the money, everybody moves on. But I do think it's one that does make sense because, listen, I rate Ekwah. I think he was pretty good for us, when he played. Tailed off towards the end, but who didn't in that season? So I'll be disappointed to see him go because I think he's a decent footballer. But, the fact that we sent him out on loan and then got promoted without him doesn't maybe speak to him being massively needed or hugely valued at the club in a purely footballing sense. So, it suits him to go somewhere that he'll get regular football. It suits us to get some money in. And like you say as well, West Ham will obviously be taking a cut. I think 35% is what I was reading, which, it is a fair old whack. But, don't forget, we also did get I think it was a 7-figure fee as a loan fee last summer when we actually sent him out in the first place. So really that kind of all gloms on together into the same big amount of money for him. So yeah, I think did we get him for free or a nominal fee? So, you bring somebody in for next to nothing, we got a season out of him. We then sent him out on loan for a season. We get a good bit of money. His career's progressing. I think it's just another 34 minutes, we'll get the model in again. But I think it's just another little sort of mini success story for the model. I think, again, it's just suited everybody. So it's nice to see. And if it does happen, I wish Ekwah the best, because I think, he was a decent player for us, and no hard feelings from me.
Yeah, and if you're following the tally score, I think it's been about 6 times we've said the model now, just in case you can. But Bomber, the other one, Aleksic looks like he's out the door. But it's interesting because I've read a lot that it seems like he's off to Partizan Belgrade on loan. But I did read a couple of sources that said it might be permanent.
So far suggests it's going to be out on loan. And I think for me personally, I think I would prefer that. There's a player there. There's definitely a player there. And for one reason or another, which is through no fault of Aleksic himself, his Sunderland career hasn't really got going. We've had to stick him out on the wings at times when we've needed to. And even when he's not playing out on the wing, he's kind of sat on the bench. It's a tricky one because I've seen flashes of him and I really want to see more. I just wonder if, similar to Ekwah, whether the club has kind of moved past him now. And there's a few in that in the squad who didn't really get a chance last year, but were part of a squad that got promoted. And having not got a chance last year in the Championship, the club are probably thinking, well, actually, we're moving past these players now. People like Samed, for example. I thought he was great in the games that he played, but he didn't play that much. And again, similar to Aleksic, I wonder if the club are just moving past him. Like I say, I hope not, because I really do think that there's a player there. So I think a loan would be perfect all round, because we get to see him play some regular football, to see actually a bit more of what he's about. And if he does kind of kick on and set it alight there, then we can bring him back and ingratiate him back into the team, and potentially in January if we need him, and he can continue and kick on his Sunderland career. But yeah, I think it would be a shame to let him go permanently. I guess it all depends on the money involved, and obviously we don't know exactly who the club are trying to bring in. If they're trying to bring in somebody who, has got 2 or 3 times the experience, 2 or 3 times the international caps, and 2 or 3 times the talent of Aleksic, then yeah, he can go, and we'll bring the next person in. Thanks very much. But yeah, I still think there's a player there.
Yeah. Actually, just on Samed, he was heavily linked with going to Stuttgart for about 5 million quid. I saw that the other day. So he looks like he's going to Germany. I mean, Jonny, just before we leave the kind of the transfer things as a whole, what do you think the impact has been on the transfer market with the World Club Cup? Because if you take that into account with the way the window opened and closed and opened again, but people wanted to get players in for that, it does mean, I mean, if you look at obviously the prime example is Bellingham. We then had 30 million quid in the bank that maybe we wouldn't have had if it was a drawn out saga until late July. So a lot of clubs have either spent a lot, and then there's probably more cash floating around in the market than would be at this time in the window.
It's a rare move in football, but I think it actually has had a slight benefit for the smaller clubs over the bigger clubs for once. Just purely this transfer window kind of divide and having the sort of 2 deadline days, because deadline day tends to suit the smaller teams, because if you've got a big boy coming knocking, it's getting a deadline day, they've got to put up or shut up, haven't they? They pay the money or they don't get the player. So, look, are Liverpool a small club? No. But Real Madrid with Trent Alexander-Arnold, they had to cough up the extra 10 million, even though they could have got him for free, because they wanted him in for the Club World Cup. Us and Borussia Dortmund, a better example, obviously, they've had to just stump up the cash that we've been trying to hold out for, because they want him in time for the competition. And so, yeah, I think you're absolutely right. There's a bit more money sloshing around in the pockets of some of the, smaller clubs, for lack of a better phrase, before anyone starts slagging us off. You could argue, maybe are we able to move as quickly for this director of football if we haven't just had extra 30 million quid come in? Because, we'll have to be paying fees and wages and stuff now, and it gives him and Speakman and the rest of them more to work with over the coming few weeks to try and bring some deals in and some players in earlier than they otherwise would have. So I think it's, for us, certainly selfishly, I think it's been a great thing, because if we had the Job kind of saga rumbling on for a number of weeks, dragging into months, then, that's just the nightmare, isn't it? Especially as a newly promoted side, because you need stuff in, as early as possible. And with our fixture list as well, I mean, we talked about it on the Fixtures Breakfast pod the other day. There's pressure on us now to start quickly, because we've got a reasonably favourable start, but it will run out sharp if we're not careful. So I think hopefully we're looking back on the start of this summer, come the end of the season, and going, well, thank God we got everything done as early as we did, starting off with the Joe Bellingham deal. So yeah, I think positive for Sunderland.
Yeah, and just a last word on transfers before we leave onto the news, Bomber. With you compiling this list every week, do you begin to realise? I mean, we've always known that they're mostly full of crap, most of these stories. But are you now seeing just the length of this list, that basically it's just players linked all over the place, and the actual percentage of these that will actually come off are probably close to zero?
Well, yeah, like you said, Chris, it's always happened. I've always distanced myself from it and not kind of paid it much mind and too much attention, until I see the scarf picks, basically. But, I've taken it upon myself to be vested and interested and provide it for everybody this year. So, but it has opened my eyes just to the magnitude of it, with the explosion of social media and all the other channels of which you can consume your transfer news. I think even just the list I'm writing, which is the one that I just kind of post on a Tuesday, I think we're up to 27 players linked. And actually the only player that we've signed is a player that we already knew that we were going to sign, so wasn't linked in the first place. Similarly, we've had people rumoured interest in Romain Mundle and Eliza Mayenda and Isidore and Dan Neil and Joe Bellingham and Chris Rigg, and the only person who's gone out the door is the one that we probably hand on heart knew that we were going to lose in Joe Bellingham. So yeah, it's crazy. Don't get me wrong, being back in the Premier League, I'm more excited about it than I have been in previous years, because we're linked with players from, like I said before, the big 5 leagues in Europe, rather than, go into Tottenham's youth team or Liverpool's youth team or places like that. And don't get me wrong, the likes of Mundle and Sirkin have been brilliant, but it's nice just to read Sunderland's name alongside Roma's and Juventus's and AC Milan's and people like that. It's something that the younger generation of our fan base will be completely alien to. But yeah, I'm all for it, and I'm enjoying it. For, like I say, I used to keep away from it. I've pledged to do it this season, and I am enjoying researching it and kind of getting excited about what could be. Fully aware in the back of my mind that 99% of it isn't going to happen.
Well, that's it. It ends up being a good laugh, actually, if you just take it like that, isn't it?
Yeah, it absolutely does. Yeah.
Yeah. And let's go into other news. And away from transfers, well, I say away from transfers, we'll go to Chris Rigg, who is the big transfer story, essentially, getting chased by everyone. But he has reportedly withdrawn from the England under-19 championship squad, European Championships. And look, he played, I was just trying to have a look quickly, but I think he played something like 45 games in all competitions last season, Jonny. And look, I've got mixed feelings about this, because I imagine it's a blow for him and you want him to play at the highest level. But after a season, after 17-year-olds played 45 games in a season, I'm desperate for him to have a rest. So I just don't know how I feel about this news.
Yeah, it's a strange one, isn't it? Because I agree where you kind of think like, oh, it's quite cool to see our players getting picked for the age groups and going to these tournaments, and especially if they go on to impress. You feel quite proud watching them, which is ridiculous to say, because what the hell have any of us had to do with Chris Rigg's football and development career? But all the fans have a weird ownership of the team. But you're right, he's played so much football this season in a really competitive physical league at such a young age, and he's done bloody well not to come out of this season with anything more than a couple of niggles or knocks. I think he's done really well to stay as fit as he has. So I'm not gonna lose too much sleep over him getting a bit of a rest over the next couple of weeks rather than jetting off to the under-19s Euros. Because as much as at the end of the day, there's only age group football, but there's a bit of prestige to playing in a Euros. But is that going to give Rigg any experience that he hasn't already picked up playing in a playoff final at Wembley, a full season of the Championship, what he's going to get next season in the Premier League? I doubt whether it's going to be, hindering his development that much.
It'll increase the ever-growing list of teams that are interested in signing him for £35 million.
Exactly. It'll just give you loads more work over the next couple of weeks. That's all it would do.
But it would have been interesting, though, Bomber. You say that, but imagine if he went to the European Championships under-19 Championships as a 17-year-old, and let's say he bagged a hat-trick or scored a worldie or, something like that. I mean, you're getting the stories now, but imagine if that had happened in the European Championships. Yeah,
and immediately the values goes up by another 10 or 15 million pounds as well. But yeah, I'm very much of the same mindset as Jonny. I want to see him have a rest, like as much as it is really, really good. And he's right, you do have a sense of pride. Strangely, I was watching the Dortmund game. I watched Joe come on for Dortmund and still had that same sense of pride. He's not even at the club anymore. Such as how big a loser I am.
We're all the same, mate. We're all the same.
Yeah. But yeah, he's going to play a part next season. There's no doubt about it. He's too good not to. So we need him to have a rest. For all things said, he's a young 18-year-old now. Let's not forget, not 17-year-old. It was his birthday, wasn't it? Not so long ago. I think earlier this week. But even so, that youthful exuberance and youthful energy only carries you so far when you're playing a whole season, a hard season that ends up in a playoff and then going straight to international duty and then straight into your first ever season of Premiership football. It wouldn't be good in the long term for him.
Yeah. I think back in the Fergie days, if this was one of his players, I think he would have pulled him. To be honest, he would have hooked him. Feign injury and get back here and I'll manage you. But I think the only other thing we need to cover was Ben Crompton. He left the club to join Ross County on a 2-year deal. 20-year-old, he was confirmed to be leaving on the retained list. But Bomber, it is a sign, though, isn't it? Some of these young players who were brought in, potentially to play. Well, I think a few of them were brought in over the last few years to play maybe League One and then Championship. We're now looking at the next level of young players, aren't we?
Yeah, and it's just testament to how far the club's come and what we've achieved in the last few years. Because Crompton, when we're sat in League One or in the Championship, is probably looking at his career and thinking, actually, I probably might have a chance here. And then all of a sudden, it's Premier League football, and the people who make those decisions within the academy have decided that that's probably not his level. So it's probably good all round. It happens every year, doesn't it? That we have a list of academy people who get released and they go on to the non-league or to the Scottish League. But what that does is gives us a chance to refresh, like you said, Chris, and rather than bringing in young players who we think might develop into League One or Championship players, we can start competing for the very best talent who might develop and become Premier League players. And whether that's with us or whether it's other Premier League clubs that we then make huge amounts of profit from. I'm not going to say the word, but that's what it was put in place for. So yeah, it's nice, and he wasn't a bad player. He'll do well over there at Ross, and hopefully he can kick on his career from there.
Yeah, that's it. And I think that pretty much brings everyone up to speed with most of the news, because it's all coming out. Most of it's rubbish, but we have tried to cover as much of it as possible. So, Jonny, I know you're rushing to your next pod. I think Jimmy Carragher's giving you grief, needing you over there on the fan debate or something like that. So, thank you very much for your time, Jonny.
Yeah, thanks, mate. Nothing quite so glamorous as that, but no rest for the wicked.
Of course, whatever you say, mate. And thank you very much, Jim Bomber White. Thank you very much, mate.
Thanks, Chris. I'll refrain from the Scottish accent next time.
Yes, please. Oh, was it Scottish, was it? Okay, right. I wasn't quite sure. But thanks again, everyone, for listening. Again, we'll have loads on the Rock Report website with all of this. Bomber's there every week with these updates, adding to that ever-growing list. I think we're almost at the 50 mark, something like that. Anyway, it's bound to probably get into 3 figures by the end of the summer. So keep a lookout for that, and keep a lookout for our daily releases on Haway The Podcast. But from us, bye for now.
This podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.